About 25 years ago, my sister and I were driving on a normally busy road, but it was late at night and was deserted. We could both see something flapping on the road up ahead. I asked her what it was, and my sister said she didn't know, but that it looked like a black garbage bag. I agreed. It really looked like a bag lying on the road being whipped lightly by the wind. As we approached, it completely changed shape. It went from being quite flat and small to morphing into a fully grown man on a bike. He was just standing there in the middle of the road with his bike. We pulled alongside and asked if he was okay. He nodded but didn't speak. We drove off. We still talk about it because it was the strangest, creepiest thing ever, and we both still can't explain what we saw. My scariest night drive happened when I was 19. I was driving home from my then boyfriend's house, and I stopped at a red light on the very edge of town. It's quite remote. There were city lights behind me, but just cornfields and shelter belts ahead of me. Because it was like 2 in the morning, I was the only one sitting at the red light. I saw something moving in my peripheral vision, and because of my location, I thought it was going to be a deer. I turned my head and locked eyes with a man, maybe in his 50s. He was creeping towards my car. When he saw that I saw him, he froze, and it was then that I noticed he had a tire iron. I ran the red light and sped out of there. When I was 16, I had a junky convertible 1989 Capri. I loved that car. One night, I was driving the back roads home out in the middle of nowhere, Missouri. Top down, I was enjoying the night air. I dove under some low-hanging trees and heard a weird slap noise from the back seat. I turned around, and to my horror, I saw a huge black snake frantically slithering towards the safety of under my seat. I nearly wrecked. I hate snakes, and I totally panicked, even though this rat snake was 100% harmless. I pulled over screaming and called my dad to come de-snake my car. I never rode with the top down in the country again. My brother and I were driving down a super remote road late at night many years ago. Wildlife was common in the area, so we drove slower than was posted. An accident could be fatal on this road. Anyway, it was a particularly dark night, so we had the high beams on and were really concentrating on the journey. We saw it at the same time. It was impossible to miss. My brother hit the brakes and we skidded to a stop in front of the biggest cow on earth. No kidding. We could have driven under it with room to spare. It was massive and it stared at us without seeming to see us. The vibe was so creepy. Other cows were around, but they were regular in size. This guy was the king of all bovine. It doesn't seem all that weird when telling the story, but something was just off with this creature. It didn't seem quite natural. My mom was in the car with my sister who was driving, and they were on their way back from some event. The street lights on this particular stretch of road weren't working very well, and it was difficult to see. My sister is chatting away, and my mom is watching the road when all of a sudden, she sees in front of the car a bike rack. It was complete with bikes on it, and it looked as if it had just dropped off the back of someone's car and they didn't notice. She screams at the top of her lungs, "Bikes!" My sister swerves, overcorrects, spins, and then comes to a stop on the other side of the road facing the opposite direction. They miraculously avoided all the cars that were going by. A few cars stopped to make sure they're okay. My sister looks at my mom and asks her how she even saw the bikes, because she didn't see them until they were almost about to hit them. My mom said she saw them and it looked like they were illuminated by a gentle blue light, but they looked back and those bikes were just sitting in the darkness. This was probably 15 years ago. My best friend in high school and I were out late being dumb teenagers. It's like 1 a.m. and we are taking the normal shortcut road back towards her house. Suddenly, I see in the ditch to my right something lumped and white. It takes about a second for me to realize it looked just like a body lying face down. I say to her, "Did you see that in the ditch? Was that a body?" She says, "I was about to ask you the same thing. What the hell?" She turns around at the stop sign up ahead and goes back. We can't quite tell from the opposite side of the road if the body was still there. So down we go and turn around again. This time we are just crawling along searching the ditch. Somehow we both glance up into the trees on a small hill above the ditch and we see it. A person in a white shirt and dark pants was crouched next to a tree trunk staring at us. We scream bloody murder and she tears ass out of there. We speed so hardcore back to her house. I don't know how we didn't die. When I was about 19, I was driving on a 2-lane road after work around 11 p.m. There were no other cars on the road, and suddenly, this guy in a red shirt on a bicycle swerved from the side of the road right in front of my car. I hit him. I felt the impact. I was yelling "oh my God" over and over, and I got out of the car to see how badly he was hurt. However, I didn't see him. I couldn't find the guy. There was no bike, no red shirt guy, no dent or blood on my car. I searched the ditch with a flashlight. A couple of people passed by while I was looking in the field for a body when a sheriff's car pulled up. I told him what happened. The sheriff said I didn't hit anyone. He told me that about 15 years earlier, a young man in a red shirt was hit by a car while riding his bike right there. He died instantly. Deputy told me that every couple years, someone driving through there believes they've hit a red shirt bike rider. I was a truck driver in the late 1990s to the early 2000s. One time, I was driving through Pennsylvania on my way back to New Jersey. I pulled over to the side of the road behind 2 other trailers for a break. In the early morning, I'm startled to hear someone bang on my right door. I jump from the sleeping compartment and quickly grabbed my bat. As I look out the window, I saw no one and nothing there. But now there's a loud bang on the left side. I'm starting to freak out. I look out the left window and there's nothing but silence now. I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on, but just a few seconds later, there's banging on both doors simultaneously. The banging is so loud and heavy that my truck is shaking. I can see that there's no one out there with both curtains open. I then quickly jump in the driver's seat and start my truck. I also see the 2 other trucks ahead of me do the same. I don't know what happened, but it's as if they all had experienced the same thing. I was driving all night from Columbus, Georgia to Washington, D.C. I had just finished some matters with the Army that evening, but it was incredibly important that I make it to Washington in time for a 7 a.m. event. I was exhausted. Somewhere in western North Carolina, the highway got very misty. I had one of those creepy feelings where I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror. It felt that an evil presence was in the back seat and I didn't want to see it. Instead, I opted to turn all of the lights on in the car. My eyes were off from the road for a split second, and when they returned, I swore there was a woman in rags standing 40 feet from my hood. She was staring straight into my high beams. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop, straight through where she was standing. I was sweating, shaking, and freezing. There was nothing and no one else on that road. Just me being terrified. Many years ago, I was driving home from a weekend camping trip. It was a very curvy, very tight, and very winding road. I have driven this road quite a bit in the past as I'm a regular camper in the area. It's very much worth noting that this road doesn't intersect any other road for about 18 miles. There are only very narrow turnouts on the side of the road to allow for faster traffic to pass. So I'm driving along with no drugs in my system but nicotine. Seemingly out of nowhere, a black Cadillac with heavily tinted windows comes up on me at a very high speed. He's right up behind me, so I pulled off the road and let him pass me. No biggie. As soon as I've gotten back up to the speed limit, an identical vehicle is up my ass again. I'm now slightly annoyed, but not scared in any way. I pull over and let the driver pass again, then continue on my way. Can you guess what happens next? Yes, the same black Cadillac comes up on me again, and again, and again. It happened a total of 6 times. Unfortunately, there were no identifying marks on the vehicle and I was unable to read the plates. It was so fast and I didn't want to fly off the mountainside while looking. My friends and I were small-town country girls. One night we were on our way to a bonfire party up in the woods. This was on a dirt road and happened many years ago. We kinda knew where the party was, but we're not really sure of the exact location. So we see a small speck of fire through some trees and figure this must be it. so I turned down that road and down a hill to a turnaround spot. As I turn off the car and everyone's opening their doors to get out, I felt uneasy. I told them to quickly shut the doors and lock them, so they did. I turned the car back on and headed back to the hill, and I asked them if they saw any other cars there. There were none. I noticed people wearing black robes and doing some kind of ritual around the fire. On the way back up the hill, we saw an upside-down red cross on the side of the road that we didn't see on our way down. I don't know whose party we crashed, but it certainly wasn't the one we were looking for. I don't know if that was scary enough for some people, but when you're way out in the woods and 19 years old in the middle of the night, coming upon something like that freaked us out. I was driving through New England many years ago. I thought the weather was fine and decided to drive on a lesser-taken road. It was close to sunset and I was going through these woods like you would any road. I then come around this one bend in the road and see a car just stop there. It's somewhat off to the side of the road with the horn blaring. I saw that there was someone passed out on the steering wheel. I immediately thought that I should stop and help, but something just kept tingling up my spine. I slowed down to get next to the car, but my instinct made me book it. In my rear-view mirror, I saw a large group of people staring at my car as I drove away, including the guy that was at the wheel. I was driving home from work about 1 to 2 a.m. It was a beautiful night, so I decided to take a route home that was more in the country instead of through town. I had to cross an old bridge that had been there probably 90 to 100 years. It was a dark area. There were no houses or lights except my headlights. Just as my front tires hit the bridge, a red fog rolls in across it. I'm sure it wasn't smoke, and it spread out quickly across the path. The bridge is quite long, and the darkness ahead of me became red and hazy. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I got across that bridge as fast as possible. After I got across, I looked in my mirror, and the fog is gone, but it looked like someone was standing in the middle of the bridge. I mentioned it to my parents the next morning. My dad said he'd always heard stories about that bridge, and supposedly a young lady hung herself from it. Many years ago, I was driving particularly late. I was on my way home after being away for a while. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. when I saw an old lady walking on the side of the road. I felt concerned about her, so I pulled over and asked the lady where she needed to go or whether she needed help. The lady just turned to me and she said, "Why did you stop? It is not your turn yet." She just dismissed me and she kept walking forward. Not wanting to make a scene or bother her, I left her alone and I continued driving. Not even 5 minutes later, down the road I saw a crashed car with an ambulance already at the site. The following day, the crash was on the front page on a local newspaper. Apparently the driver died instantly on impact. I still wonder where that lady was going since the closest town was still 30 minutes away by car. I used to do regular deliveries that was out in the boondocks, about 40 minutes out of the way of civilization and smack dab in the middle of 2 large towns. I would drive this route maybe once a month and would always pass at least one car driving towards me due to the sheer length of the drive. There was a small group of old houses on this route that were really broken down, and I had never seen anyone around them in 6 months of driving the route. I always assumed they were vacant because they didn't look livable. I was driving out to this customer one fall afternoon. I had been driving for a very long time without seeing a single car drive towards me. I finally drive past a group of abandoned houses, and there's one old lady in her front yard pushing an old manual grass cutter. But she stops in her tracks as I drive towards her. I took it as a sign I was speeding or something, so I slowed down. I take a quick glance in my rear view mirror after passing by, and she was staring straight at me. She dropped the grass cutter and turned 180 degrees to do this. It was just very odd and definitely set off my spider sense. I never saw her again or anyone else on that route by those houses in the 10 months I drove it. I was driving my truck across Missouri at the time. I stopped at an off-ramp to stretch out and take a breather. As I'm smoking a cigar, A little girl from some direction I couldn't figure out giggles and says, "Hi, mister." My initial reaction was shock. What the hell is a little kid doing here in the middle of the night? She then responds, "My mommy says you'll be all right. Don't worry." Now utterly confused, I ask her what she means. There was no answer. Since it didn't have a negative vibe to it, I just finished smoking and left. Later down the road, I realized that I forgot to fuel up at my last stop when the warning light came on. So I scramble to look at my GPS and find the nearest truck stop. As I roll up to the truck stop, my truck starts sputtering and I barely make it to the fuel line before the truck starts dying. I ran out of fuel right as I got on the fuel line. It wasn't until I was fueling up that it occurred to me what the hell happened at my last stop. I was on a drive home and it was about an 8-hour trip. At about 4 hours from home around 11 p.m., I was on a stretch of secluded highway and there was a car behind me. I didn't think anything of it. The same car followed me for the next hour, but I assumed that they were just going to the same place. I ended up stopping at a gas station to grab an energy drink, and the car stopped across the road but didn't get out. When I left, the car pulled out and followed me again. So I kept driving, and as soon as I got back into my town, I called my parents to tell them what was going on. They told me to go downtown and make 4 left turns. I did, and again, the car followed me. My parents told me to drive to the police station. The car followed me the entire way to the police station, and as soon as I turned in, they peeled off like over the speed limit. I went in and told the cops what happened, and they sent a patrol officer to find the guy, but I never heard anything about it. I was an Uber driver for a while. I once picked up a guy who wouldn't stop talking to himself and kept mentioning he had taken a bunch of unknown pills earlier. He wasn't aware of reality at all and would randomly get angry at me. He'd scream that I should be telling him jokes and entertaining him since I am his driver. I actually felt scared for my safety but shrugged it off since he looked so drunk and weak. When we were almost at his destination, he opened the door and jumped out of my car while it was still moving. Luckily, I was near stopping and only going around 5 miles per hour when he did. He didn't get seriously hurt. Around the time I first started doing rideshare full-time, I decided to try out the late-night scene in a town known for its bars. Around midnight, I got a ride request that took me 20 minutes away to a sketchy neighborhood. As soon as I pulled up to the apartment complex, I called the passenger to let them know I had arrived, mainly because I had a bad feeling about the area and wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. The passenger answered and assured me they'd be right out, which put me a bit at ease, but I was still on edge sitting there in my car. Rideshare apps have a 5-minute timer you have to wait out before you can mark the passenger as a no-show and leave. The timer eventually ran out, but I usually waited a little longer and gave another call. When I called the second time, someone else answered, saying they hadn't ordered a ride. I noticed 2 guys in hoodies approaching my car, and one of them seemed to be reaching into his waistband for something. I immediately marked the ride as a no-show and got out of there as fast as I could. I made $10 off the no-show. I had an Uber driver pick me up. Let's call him Saul. Saul picked me up from the mall wearing more chains than a 1990s rapper. He told me I was his favorite type of woman and asked for my number. He wanted to know if I lived alone. I told him no. I made up a husband and kids. He still asked if I wanted more children, implying he was going to have sex with me if he could manage it. I had him stop and went back into the mall. This conversation happened not 20 feet from where he picked me up. There was a lot of traffic, so I was stuck with him. I ended up calling Uber to get my money refunded and Saul was fired. This was obviously not the first time Saul had done that to someone. I was 19 at the time and Saul was close to 60. It was creepy. Please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more horror stories.